Well, thank you everyone for attending, and we're glad to have you be a part of this budget hearing in preparation for our Senate Assembly in a couple of weeks. Just a couple overview comments as we introduce the budget. The budget document is found on the Assembly website, number 216. As we look at this budget, you'll see that we amended the piece from what was approved at Senate Assembly last year. The Senate Council did that in their meeting in February of this year for the fiscal year that began on February 1st. And at the same time, we were working through this proposal for this budget that will begin February 1st, 2026 and go through January 31st, 2027. Some of the pieces of how the budget process began. Bishop Miller sort of did an initial draft of the budget as the Bishop of the Synod, looking through and seeing how the budget reflects some priorities and projects and goals for the Synod during this period of time. Then it went through to the Synod Finance Committee, looking at things, then on to the Executive Committee and the full Synod Council for their review and input in making that proposal to the Synod Assembly. It's always a bit of a challenge that this process began back in the fall of 2024. So you're working often 15, 18 months ahead on when the budget is going to begin. And you don't have the full year that ended in January done before we begin the process. So you're working out there, finishing one fiscal year, modifying and amending a piece for an upcoming fiscal year, as well as proposing a budget for a fiscal year that will be out there beginning in February 2026. Overall, as we look at the Synod's finances, one of the challenges, and this has been a piece that's been going on for a number of years, 15 to 20 years, the amount of mission support coming from our congregations has been declining. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen maybe a little bit more of a rapid decline in mission support coming from congregations. One of the things that I think is always a bit of a concern for us is, congregations saying, well, we wish the Synod would do more, and Synod would have more resources, more things for us. But at the same time, the Synod is dealing with less and less mission support dollars coming from congregations. So as we deal with requests to do more, while our income streams are less, oftentimes our hands are tied as we look to keep our expenses in line with what income we have, but at the same time treating our staff fairly. And certain expenses, the Synod is impacted by inflation and rising costs, the same as we understand as individuals in our homes and in our congregations and businesses. So with sort of that overview of the budget, you won't see a tremendous amount of change in this budget, in its structure, from what you've seen the last couple of years. As I begin that, I will share the budget document with you on the screen, and you will be able to see that, and we will scroll through as we look at these pieces here. As we look at this first page of the budget, the revenue section, there's a couple things I want to point out is the changes for the proposed budget for the fiscal year that will end January 31st, 2027. You notice the top line is mission support from congregations. We have put as a proposed number for that $675,000. You will see that we ended the fiscal year that ended in January of this year. The actual amount received was $674,000. So we are trying to be very realistic about this number in terms of looking at what mission support will be. The other main changes you see in the income or revenue section is the investment income. We revised that from the amended budget of 20,000 for the current year to 17,000. We just weren't sure where interest rates were going to be. Um, as well as we spend down some money, we might not have as much in the bank accounts earning that interest income. The other piece, and we'll talk about this maybe a bit more at the end, but to create the balanced budget and to show that income equal to expenses, you'll see um, the line transfer from restricted reserve or the insurance dividend, $63,338. So that is basically what are we taking from our reserves is income to balance the budget on for this budget proposal. Recently, we had been projecting something in the terms of $20,000 to $30,000 as a draw from the reserves. Some years in the past 5, 6 years, we did not have to draw any money out of that, which has been fortunate. This past year, the budget was $30,000, and we drew out a little over $24,000. So this is a significant change. It's almost doubling the amount that we are looking to take out of the reserves in order to balance the budget. That leaves us with a proposed budget with revenue of $793,938. Are there any questions about the income section before I begin moving on? Seeing none, I will move on.
1 minute, Chad.
Okay.
If at any time uh, you have a question as you're listening to Chad, you can put it in the chat or use the hand raise function, and we'll make sure that we call on you. And I'll be watching that so Chad can focus on his presentation.
Bottom of page 1 has the church-wide support section of the budget. The difference that you really see there is the church-wide support. That is the mission support that we send to church-wide. And we send 41% of the mission support that we receive from congregations and share that with the ELCA, church-wide organization. Because we are lowering the total amount expected in mission support, 41% of a smaller number results in a smaller amount being shared with the ELCA church-wide organization. That's why you're seeing that decrease of $6,150. There's a slight change in Region 8 program support. We do some of $200 in increase. That's related to some shared work across Region 8 in the area of candidacy and first call theological education. The next section of the budget is strengthening congregations and missions. The only change you really see there is you'll notice there was a supplies worship and music and a program worship and music. We really combined those two accounts and just put them all into one area under the account 1774-2400. So no real changes to the budget in that section from the amended budget for the current year. But seeing that just a combination of accounts. The next area of the budget, preparing and supporting leaders. Scroll too far. And this one continues on the next page. The real changes that you'll see in this area are in the area of candidacy. The account 1603-3100 is the professional career consultative service. That is the psychological exams that are used in the candidacy process for those entering candidacy. Cost for that is about around $1,000 per candidate. We're seeing some changes in that. The person that's been doing that for us is retiring and some unknowns in that, so we increased the budget $500 there. But offset by a change in the amount of student scholarships. Part of that is some of the tuition funding and grants and how that is changing at the seminaries, as well as the number of students that we have in candidacy at the moment. The remainder of that continues on the next page for preparing and supporting leaders. You see the total the total amount for preparing and supporting leaders is $30,050. The next area of the budget is youth and young adults. And you will see a little change there for Bloomsburg University. Part of that is they're undergoing some change in transition there, and just trying to distribute our campus ministry monies according to the number of campus ministries that we have and that we support in a fair basis according to the number of students, full-time positions, part-time positions, and how their campus ministries are structured. So the total amount for providing service for youth and young adults, $56,925. The next area of the budget is concern for human need, and $4,800 is the budget amount for Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. And the final area on this is fostering and maintaining ecumenical relations. And you'll see just a slight change in the budget from $1,000 to $800. And you see that being redistributed a little bit to focus on some program for ecumenical relations, and as well as our continued partnership, but at a little bit less level to the Pennsylvania Council of Churches. Moving on to page 4, we see interpreting the mission and ministry of the church, really sort of a communications piece. No, $700 is the budget in the proposed budget, no change from our existing budget. Global mission education is in support of global mission. $2,500 is the budget. Part of that did see a change in the current year in the amendments, and that was because of some proposed trips to our companion synods that ended up not happening or not being planned to occur in that same way. So those are really the program areas of the budget up to this point. And then we sort of move into the last half of the budget, providing for an effective organization. And this is sort of the administration and staffing of the synod, as well as providing synod office space. So these I will take in little smaller areas that we'll see broken down into some groups of administration. So these are administrative expenses, $33,850. We're hoping to save a little bit on postage. You'll notice a change in the audit to $11,000. budgeting for the potential for just some increased cost in legal expenses and some increase bit in technical support and computers. So for that total in administration of $33,850. Building and maintenance. We no longer own the Synod office building, but we do pay rent. And we do have property and liability insurance as renters. So each of those encounter some increases or projected increases, relatively small. So building expenses or insurance expenses for property and liability, $36,749. In the area of staff salaries, we proposed basically up to a 4% increase based on the current year salaries in there. We'll look at where things are and do reviews later. On the bishops, if you look at the percentage, it maybe looks like it's a higher piece, but part of that is the housing allowance broken out that remained the same. So the combined package is a 4% increase. Staff benefits, really looking at those things that are compensation based, growing at about the 4% as well, like the Social Security, the FICA contributions for our lay staff, as well as the clergy self-employment tax contributions. And one big unknown is the amount of how healthcare will change. So the bill that we pay to Portico for the staff pension and health benefits, 62,576. We do have a bigger percentage in there. That is largely to the unknowns that we won't know what the healthcare costs will actually be until they're announced later in August for the coming year. We do put $1,000 increase into staff travel to bring that to $11,000. So staff benefits at $122,957. The next section is Synod Assembly. And a $2,000 increase to facility rental, and Synod Assembly costs at $19,725 is the proposed budget there. The final page is Synod Council, and the biggest change that you see from the current year's amended budget is churchwide assembly doesn't occur during 2026. It's a once every 3-year assembly. So we will encounter some expenses related to churchwide assembly that happens later this summer in 2025, but not in 2026. And that brings that total providing effective organization. So sort of the administrative expenses, staff expenses for the Synod, $408,713 to total expenses, $793,938, showing that that is equal to the amount of income we were showing on page 1 of the budget when we bring in that $63,000 transfer from the reserves, so that the excess revenue minus total expenses is equal to 0, so that we are presenting a balanced budget. I will look at things. I see a couple questions in the chat. Let me look at those. What exactly is mission grants on page 2? Those are the what used to be called the small church grants in the um, accounting system 1606-2700. The transfer for the mission grants, what we were showing that 1532 1050 transfer for mission grants is that we were bringing some of that money in from funds that we'd received from the DEM program, the Director of Evangelical Mission, but then showing them as expenses and under 1606-2700, the small church outreach support mission grants, so that they were sort of both showing as income and expenses. I don't know if that answers your question, Anne, or I can follow it more. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at the moment. Okay. That way I can see you and see the chat a little bit easier.
No, that was fine. I was just curious if it was grants that were coming in from the ELCA. Like I know sometimes we've received uh, World Hunger grants. Congregations have applied for them. I don't know if it went through our budget per se, if it goes directly to the congregation.
Well, 100 grants, I believe, would go directly to the congregations.
Yeah, if they would give any to us, yeah.
Well, they have in the past.
So those have not come through the Synod.
Okay.
World Hunger grants directly to congregations.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, the only grant that has ever, in my time here, come through the Synod is the grant to the new congregation because the Synod has been acting as fiscal agent or
Yes.
partially.
Right.
So we do receive some grant funding that supports the work of Sue Ellen Spots is the DEM, the Director of Evangelical Mission. And we do receive a restricted grant restricted for the table in Bloomsburg. That because that is a restricted piece, it doesn't show up in this budget document. This reflects the general operating budget of the Synod and doesn't show all of the restricted funds. So the grant to the table doesn't show as income on this because it's not available for the Synod's use.
Right. Understood.
So, couple questions that might be asked of the budget or of the treasurer. Looking at the statements that were made earlier about declining mission support, has the Synod Council or the Synod administration considered other funding sources to support the ministries of the Synod?
They have discussed the realities of the Synod decreasing mission support. They have just, sort of brainstormed in some ways at ways to do that. And, are there things fee for service type things that could be offered? But nothing real specific and nothing concrete that I have seen yet at this point to propose in terms of any documents that way or anything specific related to this budget.
And there's a significant increase in drawing from restricted in the proposed budget. What impact does that have on our Synod funds that are on which we are drawing? And what is that if we're to continue to do that as we have been over the years? How is that impacting our reserves or our savings, if you will?
Thank you. And that leads into something I was going to cover before we leave tonight. So at January 31st, we really have two sources to cover these type of deficits that we draw from. So one is sort of general fund principle, which is what has been income more than expense over the years, and how much has sort of been put away in those years where there was a surplus. And it was also impacted by the sale of the Synod office building, that we no longer had our equity being held in a building and property, but our equity then became cash in the bank. So our general fund principal was $241,677 at the end of January, at the end of the past fiscal year. And we also have a restricted fund called the Synod Reserve Fund with $127,730 in it. So sort of our total at January 31st, 2025, we had about $369,000 for plus 400. So 369,400 in reserves is what I would say. Now, the current year's budget shows that we could draw $35,000 from that as part of it. So it's an allocation. And this budget then calls for a further proposed allocation of $63,338 for the fiscal year that ends in January 2027. So those allocations out of their $98,338 would leave us with $271,000 at January 31st, 2027. If you were looking to draw, and hopefully we won't need to draw the full $60,000 out of reserves, going forward. But I mean, that's the piece of where the rubber meets the road at the point of, your reserves would be down to $271,000 at January 2027. And I don't see anything coming in to really pump up those reserves in the immediate future, like during this current year. I'm not aware of anything that's going to add to those reserves at the moment.
Okay.
In the past, we were sometimes seeing money from the Lutheran Brother or from the Brotherhood Mutual insurance dividends, but those programs have stopped.
So on the expense side, has the Synod Council considered changes in the amount that we give in mission support to the ELCA?
Maybe a slight comment, but no real research, and those are to be done in consultation with the ELCA churchwide organization. I think some of that was maybe pending information coming out of the Commission for a Renewed Lutheran Church. And I think there's some pieces that will come to churchwide assembly in 2025 that talks about the dynamic and the working relationship between congregations, synods, and the churchwide organization. So I think some of that is happening at the larger level. Maybe Bishop Miller will reflect on that if he wishes to comment. But there has not been anything to start a full, detailed conversation with the mission support staff at the churchwide organization about changing that percentage of mission support currently.
Okay. This one, I would not expect anybody other than you and me, Pastor Hebring, to come up with this question, because the report that leads to it is only being posted. It may not even be up yet. I didn't check. But there's a proposal that Synod Council is giving bringing to the Synod Assembly to change the use of the Synod mission funds. And this might be a good time to talk about the potential impacts to the budget of that proposal in terms of how that money is used, because it is there in the transfer from mission funds. And how will that work if that is adopted?
Sure, I would probably see them still largely being shown in the restricted pieces. One of the pieces we have some funds that have grown over the years, and because they've invested, when a restricted fund is out there and it's invested, the accounting principle used and affirmed by our auditors and so forth, when funds are invested, the earnings on that go back into that fund. So we had some funds coming from ELCA grants, really supporting the work of the uh, um, the Director of Evangelical Mission, the DEM program that had been coming in. It goes back a number of years, and we had some money coming into that and other gifts that had come in, sort of as Synod mission funds in the restricted accounts. And there's also a couple other dormant funds that you will see in two separate resolutions that will come before Synod Assembly. When I looked this afternoon, I didn't see them posted yet either. So one of them is there was a faith church loan fund. It was from a faith church in the Williamsport area that closed in the 1980s. And throughout the 90s and into the early part of the 2000s, it was used to make some grants to congregations. Some of those were energy efficient grants, some were to make their buildings handicap accessible ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act accessibility projects. The Synod didn't really have the staff to oversee loan programs and so on and so forth. Today, we see mission isn't tied as much to bricks and mortars and building projects. We went back and researched things and spoke with our auditors, spoke with Bishop Emeritus Maine on how those funds got started. One of the things, there weren't always tremendous amounts of documentation from when those programs began back in the 1980s and 90s. So there's a proposal to combine the Faith Church Loan Fund together with funds from the Synod Mission Funds. And there was a task force that met throughout the past year. And I think they're calling it the Big Ideas Grant Fund that would allow congregations to develop a program for grants and open to the congregations of the Synod to apply for grants under a big idea, bold ideas that grant, I think is the name of the program. Big ideas or bold ideas?
Bold ideas.
Bold. Okay. Bold ideas grants. So that will come before the Synod Assembly. With that, we would have a pool of a little over $200,000 to begin working with as a grant program. And there's a hope that by giving grants, that people would see the benefits that come out of them, and they would then contribute to such a grant fund. Or as we deal with congregations that are dealing with holy closure, that would be something that they would perhaps invest in to sort of pay it forward for other congregations to carry on the legacy of ministry and mission throughout the territory of our synod.
Thank you. And for those of you who listen to this, that proposal from the Synod Council should be posted shortly and should be available to you in the essentials section of the Bulletin of Reports. One other word on the budget expenses that I wanted to speak to. It's most evident in the campus ministries section. And that is, although you see amounts in there, we don't see the budget as requiring us to give those. And we have been, our practice lately has been that we want to be in communication with our partners in campus ministry. The only two campus ministries that we support out of the, I forget how many there are, 5, 7. Two of them are Lutheran campus ministries at Penn State and at SU. The others are ecumenical campus ministries, and we look for them to be in communication with us. And if we don't have communication with them, we don't necessarily give them the full amount that has been allocated. And in the case of Lock Haven, when they don't have a program going on right now. And so even though we might budget to give money to a campus ministry, we may not end up paying that. And similarly to other budget lines where we see those numbers as kind of our maximum, if you will, without any kind of special action by Synod Council or Synod Assembly as necessary. But that along with some attempts to keep expenses down means that we can generally end the year not having to draw the full amount from our reserves that's in the budget. And I'm sure Chad will speak to that when he gives his report at the Synod Assembly on our previous year's financials.
The other resolution that you will see appearing, hopefully tomorrow, is we had a student loan fund with, again, an amount of approximately $100,000. When I became treasurer in 2016, we had 3 student loans and we were at 100% default rate. The way that tuition is funded at the seminaries is much different today. The proposal is to transfer that money and include it with the USS Fund for Leaders, to be used under the policies that are being updated for the USS Fund for Leaders. Seeing that today, it's not only rostered leaders that are serving our congregations, but also authorized lay worship leaders, as well as training and supporting lay leaders and congregations, as well as rostered leaders. And looking at some pieces there to not see those funds sit dormant and grow bigger each year, but to use them in ways that are seeking to be good stewards and using some of that piece of what was the initial intent of preparing leaders for congregations when those funds began years ago in the history of our synod, but how sometimes those the needs have changed over the last 20 to 30 years, and how do we sort of reallocate those resources to how they can best be used and meet the needs of the congregations, the synod, and the larger church today. That is, you can read my entire report and the auditor's report in the Synod Assembly Bulletin of Reports on the website. So encourage you to do that. There's some additional information there. We received a very clean audit report for the fiscal year that ended in January 31st, 2025.
So are there any other questions pressing here? If there aren't, thank you, as others have said in the chat. Thank you, Pastor Hebrink, for your work on this, your leadership in our financial matters of the synod and other things you do as well.
Thank you. You're
Uh,
welcome.
we will stop the recording here.